Hi everyone, it's Hannah from Hand Jan Crochet, and today we are making this top-down granny stitch sweater together. Now this is part of a whole series of patterns that I have called the Franny Granny collection, and I have child sizes, I have cardigans, I have hoodies, I have ones with squares around the yoke here at the top, ones without. So make sure you check in the description because there's links to where to find all of the different versions and all of the patterns in this collection if you'd like to make them. To make the sweater, I chose to use comfy worsted weights, which is from We Crochet, and this is a really nice cotton yarn that is on the lighter side of worsted, and therefore I have made some other examples that you'll see in the pattern that have used a double knit, so a category 3 weights yarn in an acrylic, and they match really nicely. So don't be afraid to try something kind of that's on the lighter side of worsted or on the heavier side of DK to see if it meets the gauge for you, because there's lots of flexibility in this pattern for getting that gauge right. The pattern comes in adult sizes, extra small to 5XL, and you'll find details in the description below and also in the written pattern, either on the blog or in the PDF of how much you'll need for each size. You're also going to need a 4.5mm or G+ crochet hook, or the hook that meets the gauge for you. Then we'll need a needle for your ends, a few stitch markers, and just off the side here, a pair of scissors too. Before we get going, let's just have a look at the construction. We start here with the neckline and then we work downwards, adding points, these points at the bottom here at the front and at the back. We're going round and round until we get the size that we need before we want to split for the sleeves. So this section here is called the yoke, and this is the thing that we will make first. And then once you have completed your yoke, what we then need to do is carry on working down, but leave a portion either side for the sleeves to fit into. So you can't see the whole thing there, can you? But either side, we then split for the sleeves, which is where our stitch markers come in, and then we just work the body sized portion of the garment. And then once we have the length that we would like, because we're going down still in this V formation here, we then will close in these sides with a very nifty trick here that means we have double crochets running down the side of each of them. Then if you want to add sleeves, we can put sleeves on, but you can also leave, I've done a sleeveless version to show you what that looks like too. It's just kind of like a nice summery t-shirt. And then we have a really simple band that we can put on the bottom, around the neckline and around the sleeves if you'd like to. It's a really versatile pattern with lots and lots of different options for you in it. So let's get going. So to begin our sweater, we are going to work a foundation chain, and these are different for different sizes. I'm making the medium size here today. So I'm going to put a slip knot on the hook and I'm going to chain 96. But do make sure that you can do the right amount of chains for the size that you're making. Once your foundation chain is the length that you need it to be, for this sweater we're going to be working in rounds, so we are going to now slip stitch into the first stitch of this foundation chain. So the important thing right now is to make sure that you don't twist this. So make sure that you run all the way around and then slip stitch into that first chain to join. Now we're ready to start working all of the way around this, and this becomes our neckline. So we're going to do that by working a stacked double crochet in this first stitch. Now this is my preferred method of starting a row or a round because we don't then need a turning chain or a start chain. And the way that we work a stacked double crochet is that we work a single crochet into that first place that we were there, and then into the side of that single crochet, into this side bar that we have here, we're going to work another single crochet. And what that does is it literally stacks 2 single crochet on top of each other, and it meets the height of a double crochet. Once we've worked that first stitch, we then need to work a double crochet into the next 2 chains. So we're going to work a double crochet here and then into the next one. Then we're going to chain 1, we're going to skip 1, and then we're going to work a double crochet into 1, 2, 3 chains. So this repeat now will form the basis of all of the garment basically. because those 3 double crochet become a granny cluster. And throughout the pattern, whether you have a set of 3 double crochet or a set of 2 double crochet, when we get further down and do some shoulder increases, they are referred to as a granny cluster in the pattern. So we're now going to carry on all the way around this foundation chain. I've chained 1 there, and I'm going to skip this next one, and then I'm going to work a double crochet into the next 3. And that's all we now need to repeat around this foundation chain. So if you go for it and do your 3 double crochet, chain 1, skip 1, all the way around, I'll meet you back here and I'll show you what we do for the next round. So at the end of that round, I have chained 1, I've got 1 more chain here to skip, and then I'm going to slip stitch into that first stitch to join. And that is the end of our round 1. And now throughout this pattern, we're going to be working in turned rounds. So we now need to flip our work over so that we have the back of the stitches facing us. And to begin round 2, we're going to slip stitch into this nearest chain 1 space to get ourselves going. And if you're changing colour, this is the point that you do it. You join into that chain 1 space that we have here. And then to begin this round, what we're going to need to do is work 2 granny clusters into this chain 1 space, and that will now form a V here, which will be the front or the back of your sweater. It's symmetrical for the front and the back. So we begin that by working a stacked double crochet, and from now on the first stitch of each round will be that stacked double crochet, and then 2 more double crochet all into this chain 1 space. Then we're going to chain 2, and then we're going to work another 3 double crochet, another granny cluster into this chain 1 space that we have here. And what that's done is created a point for us. So this is going to dictate the shape of our sweater for us. And so now we chain 1, and now working along, we are going to work a granny cluster, so 3 double crochet, separated then by a chain 1 in each of these chain 1 spaces for a certain number. So each size, or lots of the sizes, have different numbers of times we need to do this. But for the size I'm making, we need to do this 11 times. So I'm going to work 3 double crochet into this chain 1. And then I'm going to chain 1, stop trying to attack me, yarn, then skip these 3, and then work into the next chain 1 space here. And I'm going to do that 11 times, and then come back to me when you've done it the amount of times that you need to for the size that you're making, and I'll show you what we do next. Okay, so I've done that 11 times, which is the number I need for the size I'm making. And now all we need to do is repeat exactly what we've just done. So we're now going to create another point that will then become the front of the sweater in this next chain 1 space. So we're going to do 3 double crochet to make our first granny cluster of this space. Then we are going to chain 2. And then we're going to work another 3 double crochet. Then once you've made that point, we're plain sailing because we chain 1, and then in each of these chain 1 spaces we come to, we're going to work a 3 double crochet granny cluster. Then we chain 1, skip the next 3, etc., etc. So work your way around, and then when you get to the first stitch again, we're going to slip stitch to join, and then meet me back and I'll show you what we do for round 3. So here we are. I'm going to slip stitch into that first stitch to join, and then if you're changing colour here, you will need to break that yarn, and then you'll turn and you will join your new colour of yarn into this chain 2 space here. But if you're carrying on with the same colour of yarn as I'm going to do, we are going to slip stitch through to that chain 2 space. So slip stitch through to there and then turn, but only if you're using the same colour for the next round. If you're changing colour, as I say, break your yarn there and then turn over like this and then join to this chain 2 space. So now we've got this set up, we have got 2 chain 2 spaces, and this now is exactly where we put this V each time we come to it. So each chain 2 space now gets 3 double crochet, chain 2, 3 double crochet in it for each of the subsequent rounds. The most important parts for round 3 and beyond is to make sure that you follow the size that you're making, because some of them, like the medium, round 3 becomes then the pattern repeats for the whole of the yoke. So what I'm going to work now then just carries on until a certain number of rounds for that size, and a number of them work that way, but some of them need what are called shoulder increases, and I will show you how to do those. But first of all, I'm going to show you how to do this plain round, and then partway through it I'll show you if you're doing one of the sizes that needs the shoulder increases at whichever point in the yoke that you need to do them. It's the same principle. I'll show you how to do those. So, but for all the sizes, we are going to begin the round with a stacked double crochet and then 2 double crochet. That then becomes our first granny cluster. Then we're going to chain 2, and then we're going to work another granny cluster in that chain 2 space as well. Then we chain 1, we skip this granny cluster, and then off we go into these chain 1 spaces. So you're going to be working 3 double crochet in each of those, then a chain 1, skip the next one, and then work into the next one. And that carries on in this size that we're making, because we have no shoulder increases, all the way round to when you get to the next chain 2 space. And then in this chain 2 space, as I say, we're going to do 2 granny clusters separated by chain 2. So exactly what we've done here, 3 double crochet, chain 2, 3 double crochet, all in that chain 2 space. And then you'll continue all the way around to get back to where you began with 3 double crochet and a chain 1, and then we slip stitch into the first to join. And so for the sizes that don't have any shoulder increases, that's it, that's all you need to know. And you keep working that yoke, turning in rounds, changing colors as you would like to, until the pattern for size medium, for example, has 22 rounds of that. So we work up until round 22, and then you will need to meet me back and we'll be ready to split for the sleeves. However, if you are working a size that needs shoulder increases, I'm going to show you now on this example how we do that. It's not difficult, don't worry, you know all of the things that you need to know in order to do it. But shoulder increases need to happen where your shoulders are going to be. So we're going to need to add a granny cluster in at the midpoint of these 2 chain 2 spaces, and it's all detailed in the pattern as to where they need to be and how many granny clusters you work between them. But what we're going to imagine, I'm going to work another one here, and then what we will do is pretend that the next granny cluster is going to be the midpoint between your 2 chain spaces, and then we're going to work a shoulder increase here. So let's imagine that this chain 1 here is where we need to work our shoulder increase, and in this chain 1 space what we're going to be doing is working 2 double crochet, a chain 1 and 2 double crochet, all into that same chain 1 space, and then we chain 1, and then you're ready to carry on working your sets of 3 double crochet as your granny clusters. Now what this does is it adds another chain 1 space into the side of the yoke here. So then when we work the next round, you're going to come across this chain 1 space to add a cluster into, this chain 1 space and this chain 1 space, whereas before we wouldn't have had this one in the center here. So that's how it increases, and that gently adds granny clusters, because from now on then we are going to be counting these 2 stitches here as a granny cluster and these 2 stitches here as a granny cluster. So we're basically squidging 2 sets of granny clusters into just that one space. So anytime that you need to do that on the shoulder increases, it will always be in the center of the 2 chain 2 spaces that you have. But as I say, it's all detailed in the pattern as to how many numbers and which sizes need to use those. So whichever size you're making then, follow along with the written pattern to know where you do put your shoulder increases and how many rounds you need to work of the pattern. And then meet me back here and we will talk about how we split for the sleeves. Once you've completed all the rounds that you need to do for the size of yoke you're making, we are ready to split for the sleeves. Now, in order to do this, we are going to need some trusty stitch markers in order to tell us where we are going to leave spaces for the sleeves. So we're going to be now working downwards in this direction, adding length if we would like to, and portioning off down the sides here so that we then leave a set amount ready to create our armholes. And then we add the sleeves on if you would like to add sleeves after we have finished the body. So in order to do this, you will need to go and refer to the pattern for the size that you're making, because the numbers will be drastically different depending on which size it is. But the general premise is that we start counting from this bottom chain 2 space here, and we count a certain amount of spaces and then we put a stitch marker in, and that will be one part of your body. And then where that stitch marker goes in, we carry on counting around and then put another stitch marker in, and that will be the portion for your sleeve. And then we carry on counting to the chain 2 at the other side, which would be the front or the back, whichever, it doesn't matter, it's symmetrical. And then you repeat the process around the other way. You're going to count from that chain 2 space up to where it tells you to put your stitch marker, again to where it tells you to put your stitch marker, and that creates your armhole. And then you carry on counting and just make sure you have the same amount of numbers here to match for the other side of your body. So let's do that now for the medium size that I'm making. The pattern tells me, counting from this chain 2 space here, we're going to skip 11 chain 1 spaces. So I have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 and 11. And then I need to put the stitch marker, which I should have opened before I started, into the next chain 1 space. So that's our first one in. And then the pattern tells me to skip the next 8 chain 1 spaces. So we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 and 8. And then into the next one, oh, I haven't opened it again. We're going to put a stitch marker into the next chain 1 space there. Then we need to start working from this other chain 2 space that we have here, which is going to be for me at the front. And I'm going to open my stitch marker, and we're going to count and repeat the process again. We're going to count 11 from here. So we're going to count 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11. And then it will go in this next one that we have here. And then just as we did for the other, we're going to count 8 from that to give us our armhole. So we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Sorry, I've fallen off the side of the camera. And into the next one, we put our stitch marker. And then as your final check, you're going to make sure that you have got the same amount. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 and 11. Yes, before we get to the chain 2 space. So that's what we need to do before we start working round 1 of the body for when we split for the sleeves. So go ahead and put your stitch markers in where they need to be, and then meet me back here and I'll show you how we actually work the next round for the body. So ignore all of my ends. This is what we're going to do in order to split for the body. I'm in the chain 2 space there, and I'm going to begin, as we have done before, with working a stacked double crochet, 2 double crochet to make our first granny cluster, a chain 2, and then 3 double crochet all into that chain 2 space. Then we're going to chain 1, and we're going to do just as we have been. We're going to work a granny cluster in each of these chain 1 spaces, then a chain 1, and we skip the next granny cluster and then work into the next chain 1 space. And we carry on doing that up until we get to where the stitch marker is. So this chain 1 space before here, we're going to work a granny cluster in there, and meet me there. Whichever size you're making, work all of them up until you get to your first stitch marker, and then meet me back here. So there I am. I have worked into that last chain one space before the stitch marker, and I've chained one. And now we are going to work where the stitch marker is. We're going to work a granny cluster in there, so 3 double crochet. And then depending on what size you're making, you will now need to make a chain of a certain length. Now for the size I'm making, I need to chain 8 here. And that is going to work for our underarm. Now, if you've never worked a raglan before with underarm extensions, this is how we do them. We've worked into this first space that has our stitch marker in, and that signals that that's the beginning of the sleeve, the armhole. And we have made this chain, and then this chain is now going to join up with the space that has the next stitch marker in. So all of this is now going to be left because that's going to be our armhole. And what we're now going to do is work 3 double crochet, so a granny cluster, into that chain one space that has the next stitch marker in. And as I say, depending on what size you're making, we'll have a different length of chain here. Some have smaller, some have bigger. So go with what the pattern tells you, and then that will give you the right size armhole ready for when we want to add a sleeve, or if you just want to leave it as it is. And then we are plain sailing around because we chain one and then we carry on working our granny clusters all the way around just as we have been. And at the bottom here, when you get, let me just finish that stitch, oh, and I'll chain one. When we get down here to the point, we're going to do just as we have before, 3 double crochet, chain 2, 3 double crochet in there. And then all you're going to do on the other side is mirror what we've just done here. So you work in these chain one spaces up until you get to the one with stitch marker, which is the beginning of the next sleeve. We work our granny cluster in there, and then for me, for my size, I'm going to be chaining 8 and then skipping all of these, then working a granny cluster into this chain space here that's got the next stitch marker in. And then we carry on working again just as we have before until we get to the first stitch again, and we're going to slip stitch to join. So work all your way around, slip stitch to join here, change colour if you need to, and turn, and then we'll be ready to work the next round. Now I've joined my new colour to the chain 2 space here at the back, and we're going to begin this second round of the body in the very same way that we've started all of the rounds before. We're going to work a stacked double crochet and then 2 double crochet to make our first granny cluster. Then we'll chain 2 to make our point, and then 3 double crochet for our other granny cluster all in that chain 2 space. And then the side of the body is going to be very, very similar. We're going to chain 1, then we're going to put our granny cluster in each of these chain 1 spaces along. Then we chain 1, skip the next one, etc, etc. And what we need to do now is work up until you get to your underarm chain. And now again, the underarm chain is very different in different sizes. So once we get there, the instructions will be very different. But get to this point, this is exactly the same for all of the sizes. So carry on working up until we get to this chain 1 space before we get to the underarm extension chain. So here we are at that underarm extension, and I can't say it enough that different sizes will do this very differently. But if your size happens to have a chain 8 under the arm, which lots of them do actually, then this is the way that we do it. So we've chained 1, and then what we're going to do in the first chain of that underarm extension, we are going to work a granny cluster. So we have 1, 2 and 3 double crochet all into that first chain of the chain 8. Now we don't chain 1 at this point. We are going to skip the next 2 chains here, and then in the next 2 chains we are going to double crochet 2 together, and that looks like this. We begin a double crochet, we yarn over and pull through 2, but we don't complete that stitch there. We're going to yarn over and start another double crochet in the next chain along. We yarn over and pull through 2, and then we yarn over and pull through all 3 that we have there. Then we don't chain one. I know it's very odd seeing as we've been chaining one between everything all the way along, but we're now going to skip the next two, and then in the next chain we are going to work a granny cluster. Couldn't think of the word there. A granny cluster. So 3 double crochet into that last chain of the underarm chain, and that's what our underarm will look like if you have got a chain 8. It will look fairly similar, but with just a different number of granny clusters between where we are working into the middle here for different sizes. So do make sure that you go and check in the written pattern exactly what we need to do for the size that you're making. And then once you've done that, we are ready to chain 1 and then skip this granny cluster, and then off we go with the stitch that we know here in the granny clusters in each of the chain 1 spaces. So then you just chain 1, skip, etc., etc. Carry on, work your point at the chain 2 here that we've always done, and then the great thing is it's lovely and symmetrical. So we're going to carry on up this side until you get to your other underarm chain, and then you work exactly the same. You're going to work a granny cluster here in the first one, skip 2, double crochet 2 together, skip 2, and then a granny cluster in the last, and then you work around in those chain 1 spaces up until you get to your first stitch again, and then you join there. And then if you're switching yarn, you switch your yarn and turn. If you're not changing yarn color, then you just slip stitch along to that chain 2 space and then turn, ready to work round 3 of the body. Now round 3 is the same for all of the sizes. We are going to work in the same way up until we get to the last but one chain space before the double crochet 2 together. So here's our double crochet 2 together under the arm here, and it's the last but one. So this is not a chain 1 space here. Don't count that, whatever you do. This is the last one, and we're doing the last but one. So we're going to work up until we get to this chain 1 space here. And if it helps, then put a stitch marker in there before you start your round, and then work up until there with a granny cluster. I should have said, shouldn't I, before we start? Here we go. We're going to work the same. We're going to work our point of our stacked double crochet, our 2 double crochet, chain 2, and then 3 double crochet all in that same place, because we are still increasing here. We're still putting a point at the bottom that will add length to our sweater at this point. And then we're going to chain 1, skip the granny cluster, and then work into that chain 1 space there. So a granny cluster in each of these chain 1 spaces, followed by a chain 1. Up until we get to that point where I've just put the stitch marker there. So I've put a granny cluster in the place where we have the stitch marker, and I've chained 1, and now what we're going to do, we are going to skip this granny cluster and work a granny cluster in the next chain 1 space that we have. So that's 3 double crochet there, and then rather than chaining 1 at this point, we are going to just skip this granny cluster, and then we're going to work a double crochet into this double treble, no, that's the wrong word, Hannah, into this double crochet 2 together. So no chain 1, and we just work a double crochet into that stitch that's directly in the center of the underarm, and then we don't chain 1. We're going to skip this granny cluster and then start working a granny cluster in the next chain 1 space. And then once you've done that, we've completed the underarm section of it, and you can chain 1 and you can absolutely go for it with your granny clusters in your chain 1 spaces just as we have before. And the rest of the round is all very similar. We carry on working, create our points, and then as you work along the other side, it's all tangled on itself. As you work on the other side, we will work to the chain 1 space before the last, before our double crochet 2 together. So it's going to be this one that you work into, and the reason we do that is so that we don't get confused and add a chain 1 space where we don't need one, because essentially what we're doing underneath this arm here, if I show you the one that I've just done, we are now beginning to wobble the camera, we're now beginning to decrease underneath where the arm is to pull it in. What we want to do is create now a triangle that's going to tether in the body here underneath the armhole. So it may feel strange, but once you get going, it will make perfect sense because it will decrease naturally when we now do this for each of the rounds. So carry on with this round, making sure you do your decrease under the arm on the other side, and then you can carry on and slip stitch in this first to join, and then we will turn, and that round we repeat for as many as you like. So I've given a suggestion in the pattern of working another 2 rounds for the length that I like it to be, but you can work as many or as few as you like, because where this point is how long without the ribbing, bear in mind if you want to add the ribbing to it, but this is how long that your sweater will be. So the more rounds that you repeat of this round 3, the longer that your sweater will become, and that's absolutely fine. You can make it as long as you like, but when you are ready and that it is the length that you want it to be, you are then ready to flatten the sides, and we will fill in this whole triangle here. So once you've got to that point where you've repeated that round as many times as you like for the length, come back to me and we will flatten the sides together. When you've repeated round 3 as many times as you want to get the length that you're happy with for your sweater, we are then ready to close and flatten the sides here. So we've been decreasing underneath the arm here, and as you see, I actually didn't add any more rounds here. I've decided that this is the length I'm going to go for on this version. What we need to do is flatten this section here. If I turn it here, if we carry on working round 3, it would just get longer and longer and longer, and we would decrease under the arms as we have been. So we'd add one here, but then take one away here. But what we can do now is we can flatten this section here, and we're going to need to do that one side at a time. So we'll work now in rows for this side and create a triangle that goes in there, and then we'll repeat the process and we'll work a triangle on this side here. So I've broken my yarn and I've turned around because I'm going to change my colour, but if you're not changing colour, don't worry, just slip stitch into that chain 2 space and then turn. And I'm joining my yarn here, and then for this very first one, rather than working a point, we are just going to be working a stacked double crochet in that chain 2 space, and that's all we need to work in there. And then what we're going to do is skip this granny cluster that we have here, and then we're going to work directly into the first chain 1 space that we come to, and we are working a granny cluster in there, so our 3 double crochet stitches. And so the rest is the same as it was before. We're going to chain 1, and then we're going to work our 3 double crochet for our granny cluster in the next space, and so on and so forth. And the important thing is that our underarm is going to decrease in exactly the same way. So we're going to be working into this chain 1 space here, the last one before our double crochet that's here, and we're going to be working no chain 1 there and just a double crochet into there. So I'll work to there and we'll go over that, and then you'll have everything you need to know for decreasing on this row. Here I am in that last chain 1 before the center of the underarm. So I haven't chained 1 here, and I'm going to work just directly into that double crochet, and I'm going to put a double crochet into it. And then we don't chain 1, and into the next chain 1 space here, we start working our granny clusters again. So we work this now up until we get somewhere towards this chain 2 space that we have here. So we're going to be working into this chain 1 space, but then we're not going to chain 1 after that. So come to here and then meet me back, and I'll show you how we finish this row. So here we are in that last chain 1 space before the chain 2 at the point, and we're not going to chain 1 there. We've done a granny cluster, no chain 1, and then into that chain 2 space we are just going to be working a double crochet. Now if you're changing colour at this point, that's the last stitch of the row, so if you're changing colour at this point, do it on the last yarn over and completion of the stitch. If you're carrying on with the same colour, you are good to go. You're going to turn your work, because remember we're only going to be working on this side now, up and under the arm and back down to the other side, so only half of our top do we work at this point. So now I am going to change colour, but I will just show you quickly how we now begin the next row. We are going to work a stacked double crochet in that very first stitch, and then we're going to skip this granny cluster and then work a granny cluster in the chain 1 space that we have there. and you carry on and do exactly the same as you did for the previous row here, and work your double crochet in the center there to pull that in. And then you work along with your granny clusters into up to the last chain one space here. We don't chain one, and then you work a double crochet into that very last stitch. So what that means is that we decrease at both ends and in the middle here as well. So then all we need to do is carry on repeating that row back and forth, and your side will get smaller and smaller and smaller up until the point where you have 4 granny clusters. So you'll have 2 at this end and 2 at this end, and then you'll have a double crochet at this end, a double crochet at this end, and a double crochet in the middle. So the pattern explains this as well, that we need 4 granny clusters and then 3 double crochet, and then the pattern changes. So up until that point, keep going merrily away with whatever color changes you want to do for the side, and meet me back here when you've got that number, and I'll show you how we finish and complete this side. Here we are then. We have 1, 2, 3, 4 granny clusters, and then 1, 2 and 3 double crochet stitches. And the principle now is really similar. We are going to now work a stacked double crochet here in this first one, and then we're going to come straight to this chain one space and work our granny cluster of 3 double crochet there. And then, as you'll see, we're already at the point where we need to decrease in the center. So we work a double crochet in that center there. Then we go straight for this chain one space and work our granny cluster there. And then we're already at the end, and we're going to work a double crochet in the last stitch there. So no chain ones for that row there. And then the last row that I'm also going to just do in this colour to show you here is even simpler and quicker. We have a stacked double crochet here in the first stitch. Then we skip this granny cluster, go straight for this double crochet and work a double crochet in it. And then we skip this granny cluster and then work a double crochet in that last stitch there. And that is all there is to it to complete this side. I'm just going to break the yarn. To show you. We pull this through, and we now have a completed side. If I can untangle it there at the top. It's hard to see here, but so here's your armhole. This is the side of your sweater, and this is now the flat bottom. And the other side that we haven't yet done needs to now be filled in. So you're going to begin at your chain 2 space that faces the direction that we need to work your stitches in. You need to work out which way you're facing for the stitches of this first one when we started to flatten, and copy that direction. And that's all we need to do now to close the other side. So work away and close both of your sides, and then come back to me and I'll show you an idea for a couple of different ribbings. You don't have to put any ribbing on the bottom if you don't want to at all. I haven't yet decided on this one what I'm going to do, but you can add a full ribbing, you can add a small one, or you can just leave it as it is with the ends weaved in. So go ahead and make your second side there, and then we will talk about sleeves. Now I've closed both of my sides and flattened my bottom, I wanted to go through a few different options that you have for the bottom of the sweater, whether you want to add a ribbing, whether you just want to add a small edging, or whether you want to leave it as it is. It's entirely up to you. The pattern has got information about all the different options that you can try. So the number one is to leave it as it is. So that's all done and dusted. Thank you very much. Another option is to add a join as you go ribbing. Now this I have added, this makes it more into more of a traditional jumper or sweater kind of look. And what we're going to be doing with the right side facing us, we will join, if you're going to use a different colour or not, you can carry on with the yarn that you've finished with if you wanted to on that last seam there. But I would join, if you're starting afresh, to one of the side double crochet stitches. And then let's move that out of the way so you can see. What we're going to do is chain any number that you would like to make the rib the length that you want it to be. So in this example, I'm going to just chain 7 just to show you. And then what we're going to be doing is working a single crochet into the second chain from the hook. So I'm going to go into the back bump there, and then in each along. So this is going to take our stitch count down to 6. And then we are ready to slip stitch into the side of the next stitch of the body. And this is what means it's join as we go, because we're going to join it to the body as we work back and forth in rows. And then we're going to turn over, and we're ready to work those 6 stitches, and we're going to yarn over slip stitch in the back loop of each. So we put our yarn over the hook, and then we go into the back loop of that first stitch that we come to, and then we yarn over and we pull through everything for that yarn over slip stitch. Yarn over and pull through everything, remembering to go into those back loops there. And this gives you lots of lovely, I can't say it, this gives you loads of lovely texture to the rib here. And then what we do is we turn and we chain 1, and then working into the back loops of these stitches, we are going to work a single crochet in each of them. So your count will always be 6. And from now on in, when we get to the end of a single crochet row there, we are going to slip stitch in the side of the next 2. So each of these double crochet stitches count as 2 stitches when they're laid flat. So we did just into 1 there. So then we're going to go into the side of this one, and then the first part of the side of the next one. And then we turn, and then we're ready to work our yarn over slip stitches. So there we go, these ones into there. Now I think I'm going to leave this one as more of a summery top, so I'm not going to add this bottom band to the finished version of this one, but it does look great when it's done, and I have got pictures of other versions that I have made that do have this on them. So if you would like to do that, then carry on working that rib all the way around the bottom and come back around to join, where am I? Here. It will carry on and it will come here, and then once you've finished that, what we'll need to do is join these 6 stitches that you did at the beginning to the last 6 stitches with a slip stitch seam, and that will join it into a band, and that will sit at the bottom of your sweater as you see here. Another option for the bottom of your sweater is to work in rounds at the bottom here, joining as we did before at the bottom here, and then to work yarn over slip stitches, which look like that, into each of the stitches. So we're going to yarn over, pull through and pull through everything, yarn over, put into the stitch, remembering that each of these stitches get two stitches allocated to them. So the height of the double crochet, because we're doing it laid on their side, aren't we? You see, they add into there. So I'm just going to work a whole round of those, and then meet me back here and I'll show you what we do for the next one. Now when we get back to meet our first stitch, what I'm going to suggest is that we don't slip stitch to join. We are going to work in continuous rounds now, because I don't envisage this rib or this bottom band to be all that big. So continuous rounds will work really well here. And I've just pulled up this loop here to show you, because what I want us to do is go into that very furthest loop, which is not the back loop though, it's our 3rd loop of this yarn over slip stitch. So when we're working in rounds, we have the front loop facing us, then the back loop here, and then this 3rd loop, which is the extra loop we have made. And we're going to work into that loop and work, she says, we're going to work a yarn over slip stitch into there. And then I would, if I was you, just put a stitch marker here to know that that's the first stitch of my round, and then go around working into those 3rd loops a yarn over slip stitch, and that will push forward those loops from your front and your back and give you a lovely detailing there at the front. And that is all there is to it for this version of it. You can work as many or as few rounds as you like of this. I think I might only add one or two more here, and then that will be the bottom. You're going to, when you do finally decide to finish, you're going to slip stitch into your first stitch to join, and then you'll be ready to weave in your ends. Then once you've done the bottom band, however you've decided to do it, we'll be ready to put the neckline on. For the sweater neckline, I'm going to mimic what I have done here on the bottom with this yarn over slip stitch edging here. To do that then, we want the right side of our work facing us, and I'm starting here at the center of the back. So we have a chain one here that we are going to join into. So we grab our yarn, and just as we did for the bottom, we are going to chain one, and then in that chain we are going to work a yarn over slip stitch. And then in each stitch along, so these are the other sides of the foundation chain that we worked at the beginning, we are going to work a yarn over slip stitch. So you will see you have your 3 for the 3 double crochet, and then you have 1 for the chain 1 space that we left at the very beginning, and then we come across 3 double crochet again, etc, etc. Now the way I'm doing this is going to turn this into a little bit more of a scoop neck rather than a V-neck, but if you want yours to stay into a complete V, then you can just add a stitch here at the start, and that will add for the shaping there. But essentially we just work a yarn over slip stitch for each of these stitches and chains around. Here I am back at the beginning again, and I'm not going to join, I'm going to carry on in continuous rounds. If you want to finish here with just that one round, then absolutely go for it, join and break your yarn and all of that jazz. But if you want to carry on and do another round, as I'm going to do, I'm going to go into, just as we did at the bottom band, into that third loop that's sitting just behind there, and work a yarn over slip stitch into each of those. And I think it just gives it that just tiny bit of extra texture, that was hard to say, extra texture that then will set off the top and balance it with the bottom band as well. So work around for this second round and then slip stitch into your first stitch to join, and then you'll be ready to weave in your ends here. Whether you are following the pattern for the hoodie, the cardigan or the sweater here, we are going to make the sleeves for all of them in exactly the same way. So even though I'm working here on the hoodie version, this will apply to the cardigan and the sweater as well. And so what we need to do is we have created our armhole, haven't we? And that will be a different size depending on which size you are making. So you'll have a different underarm seam. Yours will look different to this, and please don't worry about that unless you are making the same medium that I am here. But the principle again is exactly the same. So we are going to find the chain one space that is nearest the armhole but that doesn't have anything joined to it. So this one has something joined to it, but this next one doesn't. So this is the one that we're going to join to. Because what we're going to do is we're going to work granny clusters all the way around until we get to the underarm, and then we do something a bit different. Now in the written pattern, you'll need to find the size that you're making, because round one for each of them is written out individually and it's very different to make sure that we get the right amount of granny clusters in this armhole space. But the principles are the same. We're going to start with working a stacked double crochet here, and then 2 more double crochet to make our first granny cluster. Then we're going to chain 1, we'll skip the next granny cluster, and then 3 double crochet in the next. We chain 1, we skip, and then we work around, and we're going to work these granny clusters into each of them up to the last empty chain 1 space of this armhole. So there we are, I'm in that last chain one space before the armhole, and now my instructions for my size say 3 double crochet into the chain one space joined for armhole. So that's in this one here, and this is where you really need to check because it might be different for your size there. And then we're going to chain one, and now we're going to start working in this underarm extension, which we have working along here. And we need to do 3 double crochet in the first chain of the underarm extension. So that's here where another granny cluster, you remember, went in the opposite direction when we were closing underneath the sleeves or underneath the armholes. Then we chain one, we skip the next 2, which are the 2 chains that we skipped there. And then we're going to work 3 double crochet in the next chain there. Then we're going to chain 1, then we're just going to skip 3, so that's 1, 2 and 3, and then we work 3 double crochet in the next, which happens to be the last chain of the underarm extension for this size. Then we chain 1, and then we do 3 double crochet in the space where the armhole joins, so that's a chain 1 space that has already got a granny cluster in it, but we add another one to it because then that is for our sleeve. And so then we chain 1, and then we skip this granny cluster, and then we're going to slip stitch in this first to join. And now for the sleeves, just like we did for the bodies, we're actually going to turn. So we work in turned rounds for these sleeves. Once you have done that first setup round, so round 1 of your sleeves, and made sure that you've got the right amount of granny clusters for the size that you're making, you can work, as it tells you in the written pattern, your sleeves in any way that you would like. The things that we need to know is how to do a straight round, so to keep the count the same, and how to do a decrease round. And in the pattern it does suggest how to do a full length sleeve and where to start decreasing on each of the different sizes. But I think the best thing to do at this point is just to try it on yourself and decide where you would like your decreases to be. And indeed you don't have to do decreases at all if you don't want to. One of my versions I think I might keep with a completely straight sleeve and no cuff on at all for a really nice light summery look. But then you can taper it down if you want to as well. It's really lovely and versatile. So let's look at how to do a straight round first of all. So we have turned, and now we're going to work a stacked double crochet and then 2 double crochet in that chain 1 space. Then we're going to chain 1, we're going to skip this granny cluster, and then we're going to work 3 double crochet a granny cluster into that next chain 1 space. And that is all you're going to do all the way around, working these granny clusters separated by a chain 1. And then when you get back to your first stitch, you're going to slip stitch to join, and then you're going to turn, and then you'll be back into that chain 1 space all ready to start your next round. If you would like to decrease at any point in your sleeves and taper them in, then we need to work a decrease round, and that begins with a stacked double crochet. And then what we're going to be doing is decreasing and making this chain 1 space and this chain 1 space into just one set. So we're going to get rid of 1 granny cluster per decrease round. And so we're going to yarn over, and we're going to work a double crochet 2 together over this chain 1 space. So begin it here, and then you're going to end it in this one here. So you're going to then go over there, yarn over, and then pull through all 3. So that is a double crochet 2 together that straddles these 2 chain 1 spaces. And then we finish this new granny cluster with a double crochet there. So we have 3 stitches, and that now counts as a granny cluster, but it's over 2 chain 1 spaces. And then we chain 1, and then we work regular granny clusters into the rest of the chain 1 spaces around your sleeve. So chain 1, skip the next, and off we go. So that's all there is to it for a decrease. You just do a decrease cluster at the beginning of the round. And then when you get back to here, you're going to slip stitch into this one, and you'll find then that you've got one less chain space and one less granny cluster than you had on the round before. So work your sleeves as you would like them, and then be mindful at the end, if you would like to add a cuff or a little piece of ribbing, then meet me back here and I'll show you a couple of options for those. Once your sleeves are the length that you'd like them to be, we have some options for the sleeve cuff here. Now, option one is to do nothing, just leave it as it is. They're really on trend at the moment, sort of slightly wider sleeves without any cuffs at all. Option two is to do a join as you go, row by row sleeve cuff. Option three is what I've done on the base of this version here, is some yarn over slip stitches in the round. So I think that's what I'm going to end up doing on here, but I'll quickly show you the row join as you go rows. So if you're using the same colour, then obviously you can carry on with the yarn as you finish your last round of your sleeve. But we just join to any position. I'm doing this just to show you, but I would generally join underneath where your sleeve is going to be. So it's underneath your arm. And what we're going to do is chain out as many as you would like to end up the length of the cuff that you would like it to be. And then we're going to work single crochets into the back bump of each of those chains up until you meet up again with your last round. Then when we get to the end of that, we are going to, this very first time, just slip stitch in one stitch here. And then we're going to turn just this cuff, and then we're going to work a yarn over slip stitch into the back loop only. So turn over there, yarn over and pull through everything. Yarn over to begin, pop through your stitch, yarn over and pull through everything. So we work those until the end of this row now. And then we turn. Then we chain one, and then we're going to single crochet in the back loop only. Now if you want a slightly tighter cuff, then you can do yarn over slip stitches for both of these rows, the front and not the front and the back, sorry, so the right side and the wrong side. And then you can then slip stitch into the next two. So it's only the first time we do it that we slip stitch into one. So we slip stitch into two there, and then you're ready to turn and work your yarn over slip stitches in the back loop only. And so you just carry on doing that all the way around the edge of your sleeve. And then when you get back to here at the beginning, you're going to join with a slip stitch seam to the beginning. The other option, and the one I'm going to go for this one, I think, is to do a yarn over slip stitch in the round. So I'm going to chain one to begin, and then I'm going to yarn over, pop through that stitch, yarn over and pull through everything. And you're just going to work one of those for each of the stitches and the chains that you have around. Now, if you want your sleeves to be slightly tighter, then you could just not do it in the, sorry, not your sleeves to be tighter, your cuffs to be tighter, not do a stitch in any of these chains that you come across. But I would like mine to be nice and level and keep the size that they are. So that is all there is to it, and you can work as many rounds of this as you like, as I say, but do be mindful that it does add a fair bit of bulk and weight to the end of your sleeve, which can be a really good thing. It can be a really, really good thing, but just try on as you go and figure out how long you would like yours to be. It's just meant to be a little nod to detailing at the end of your cuff there. So make your cuffs however you would like them to be. Thank you so much for joining me to make this granny stitch sweater. I really hope you've enjoyed it. I am very much looking forward to seeing your version, see what colours you decide on and how you decide to style it. So come and find me. I'm Hand Down Crochet across all the social media places you'd expect me to be, and on here too, of course. And I will see you again soon.